concerns. So, Manisha ma'am, I would like to now invite you for facilitating this session.
Okay, thank you, Ravneet ma'am. Good afternoon to everyone, and I welcome all of you to the day 4 of the week-long FDP. Today is the third session of the day. The FDP is on teacher teaching and teacher education processes, concerns, and prospects. It has been jointly organized by the Department of Elementary Education and IQSC, Mata Sundari College for Women, University of Delhi, and the Teaching Learning Center for Social Science, Dr. Hari Singh Gaur Vishwavidyalaya, Sagar. Today, we are very pleased to have amongst us Professor Bharti Bhaveja. Just to give you a brief introduction to ma'am, most of us, we all know her, but I'd like to just introduce ma'am again. So ma'am graduated in MEd with a gold medal from Jamia Millia Islamia and her PhD from Central Institute of Education, CIE, University of Delhi. She joined CIE as a faculty in the year 1984 and later becoming its head and dean from 2006 to 2009. I had joined ma'am CIE as a B.Ed, and I did my B.Ed and M.Ed during the same tenure.
Okay.
So her area of study and research is cognitive psychology, pedagogy, and teacher education. She also had the honor of receiving the British Technical Cooperation Scholarship. During her headship at CIE, ma'am had laid a major curriculum renewal process in the field of teacher education. Courses designed under this program have been adopted by several states and private universities in India. In view of her services rendered to the cause of teacher education, ma'am has also been conferred with the Award of Eminence by the Indian Association of Teacher Educators. She also held many important administrative posts at University of Delhi. She has been the director, Women's Studies and Development Center. She was also the presiding officer, Internal Complaints Committee, and she has also been the provost of the PG Hostel for Women before her retirement. Post retirement, ma'am continues to provide her expertise as member of various academic bodies, state universities, UGC, NCERT. She is also a member of the Consultative Committee Inter-University Center for Teacher Education at BHU. Ma'am has authored several research papers and articles in various national and international journals. She continues to participate in several national and international seminars and conferences. So today, we are very pleased that ma'am, you are here to address all of us. And I think Ravneet ma'am wants to say something.
Okay.
I want to take the liberty, ma'am, of requesting you if you can also talk about contextual situatedness of learning, how, ma'am, situated cognition works. I know that you wanted to talk about the challenges in the light of the national education policy. And, ma'am, I know, as a student, I have heard you talk on that, and it is always so insightful that my heart again beats for it. So if you can, ma'am, also tell us about that a little bit. So we will be very delighted, ma'am.
Sure. Thank you, Ravneet, and thank you, Manisha, for such a generous introduction. You know, as I've been saying wherever I go, that my introduction scares me because then I'm expected to stand up to that expectation. So I would just like to be introduced as Bharti Bhaveja, who's been a teacher at CIE and who has always loved her students. That's my best introduction. Thank you so much for that. Okay. As Ravneet has said that, originally I had a plan, and I had sent that topic also to her, where I was going to discuss teacher education, model teacher education program, or in the light of the new education policy. What are its ambiguities and what are its challenges? But I believe after talking to a few people, including Dr. Ravneet and some participants who happen to be my students, that a lot of discussion has already happened in this area. And I really don't want to now rub it too much, because we've had several discussions on the new education policy 2020, not just at the academic fora, but also at the political platforms, and otherwise also in Doordarshan, so on and so forth. Now, I am trying to articulate some of the objectives which they have stated in NEP, some of the suggestions that they have given with what Ravneet has just now asked me or requested me to connect. And I think that's very relevant, Ravneet, that's really very relevant. Because if you look at the NEP 2020, it comes out as a very, something very grandeur, fantastic, something, what would say, but when things are so romantic, they seem to be out of reach. You feel that, oh, is it possible to achieve all this? This is something too good, with a few exceptions, with a few peeves that people have about it. By and large, it talks about, I think, everything under the sun, not just in India, but abroad also. So that way, and the second point is that I generally believe in positive, in more constructive. So we have read and heard so many severe critiques of this policy. Some people like to call it bashing. It has been bashed a lot. But to that, I have to say that you can bash anything. The best of the things that may come before you, if you decide to find faults with it, you can find so many faults with it that, उसकी चीर फाड़ करना बहुत आसान है. लेकिन ये बताना कि इसकी जगह फिर क्या हो, अगर ये आपको एक्सेप्टेबल नहीं है, तो जिसमें मुझे भी कुछ पॉइंट्स की प्रॉब्लम है, तो ऐसा नहीं है कि मुझे इन टोटो वो एक्सेप्टेबल है, एक्सेप्टेबल तो है, पर मेरे इश्यूज हैं उसके साथ. और एज अ टीचर एजुकेटर जिसने करीब 35 साल टीचर एजुकेशन में काम किया है, मुझे लगता है कि अब हम टाइम आ गया कि हम ज्यादा कंस्ट्रक्टिव रोल प्ले करें इसमें. तो क्या उसमें एम्बिग्विटीज हैं या क्या उसमें शॉर्टकमिंग्स हैं, हम उसे कैसे एड्रेस करें. दैट्स द जॉब ऑफ अ टीचर. We have something, we have children in our class. So if we become too critical of them, we won't be able to help them grow. So what we have to take a more positive stance towards it and see what we as educators, and of course teachers have to say with regard to this, and give suggestions as to what can be done. So the direction of my talk is going to be this only, that I'm going to connect a few things. Now, since new education policy has been discussed, I think even in your program so many times, if anybody has to say something regarding that, what are their particular issues with it, or if any question is there, I wouldn't mind if they put up that question first, so that I can also try to address that. Otherwise I can begin with what I have to say. So is there any question? Please put it up, and if you receive questions, Ravneet or Manisha, just tell me, because yeah. So it is very commonplace, and now think इतनी बार हम सुन चुके हैं उसको, और अब हमें कोई नींद में भी उठा के पूछेगा ना कि उसके मेन फीचर्स क्या हैं न्यू एजुकेशन पॉलिसी के, तो हम बताएंगे कि उसमें फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी, स्ट्रक्चरल फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी है, उसमें बहुत सारे एग्जिट्स हैं, और आप इंटीग्रेटेड है, वो इंटीग्रेटेड प्रोग्राम है, और इसके इतने लेवल्स हैं, 3+ मिडिल है, फिर उसके बाद में सेकेंडरी है, फिर इस तरह से चल के ये सब चीजें, उसकी जो बेसिक ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल स्ट्रक्चर है, वी आर ऑल्सो फेमिलियर विद इट. वी ऑल्सो आर फेमिलियर विद its emphasis on the use of mother tongue as the medium of instruction, especially at the earlier stages. And we've been saying this, all teacher educators and teachers have been saying this, that, initial education should happen in mother tongue. However, some are of the view from the ones from the NEP that maybe it can continue even later. With that, I have problem. But this whole very good intention of starting teaching using mother tongue as the medium of instruction, or the home language as the medium of instruction, poses a challenge to multicultural classrooms, to multilingual classrooms, particularly in metropolitan cities like Delhi, like now most of the cities, the B class even cities, in the sense that those level cities also have multilingual students. So one doesn't know which mother tongue are we referring to. So having said this, the policy also says, that the teachers should be recruited from the same background, from the same area in which they are supposed to teach. And the teachers, while recruitment will be tested for their ability to teach in local language. So, like for example, in Delhi, there are in every class, there would be children coming from different socio-cultural backgrounds, coming from different linguistic backgrounds, but they all can understand and speak a language which Delhiites speak. So that may not be a pure Hindi, that may not be a pure Urdu, that may not even be pure Punjabi, but it's a mix of so many things which belongs to North India. So you have a starting point where you can make entry as a teacher to engage with them. Once you make entry, when I say entry, I mean entering their cognitive world, entering their learning space by using a language which they can comprehend. And then you start thinking about the dimensions of language which need to be further pruned, or further developed, or skill that they would require. So we know that the early stage, where is the foundational stage, where they're talking about, where they emphasize, the developing the ability, developing linguistic abilities, or nurturing linguistic abilities, nurturing numerical abilities, and also nurturing the socio-emotional potentialities and abilities with which the child is born. Or they don't say with which the child is born. That's I am saying, because I'm also going to focus on that. So these are at the foundational stage, this is the emphasis. I'm sure we can even communicate without a language. If a child is concerned, if a 3+ is concerned, the ones who used to, the pre-school children, even if they don't know the language completely, the one that you speak, or even if you don't know the language that they speak, there is still communication. Because I think individuals at that stage are so communicative through gestures, through other actions. Their needs are limited, and they understand the language of care and affection. If you begin with that, then one will start making inroads and then reach out somewhere to their cognitive or to their personal world. I would like to call it a personal world. So if you look at the model teacher education program which NCTE has made, unfortunately or sadly, there is no mention of the third force psychology, humanism. So for me, one of the ambiguity or the contradiction is this. The first contradiction that comes here is this. On the one hand, we're talking about self-development. We're talking about compassion. We're talking about empathy, we are talking about ethics, so on and so forth. But we're not talking about the psychology which particularly deals with it, the humanistic approach to psychology. You may have not seen that program, but because I'm in that committee, so I know that this is not there. Humanistic approach, or what the psychologists like to call the third force psychology, is not there. This is not listed in the curriculum. Here, even here in the NEP, they say that the NCTE teachers or the people who are employed there, the experts would travel abroad to understand or would try to understand the pedagogies used abroad. For me, the other contradiction is, or the ambiguity is, that there is an overemphasis on local. There is an overemphasis on cultural situatedness. There is an overemphasis, and I have no problems with that. There is an overemphasis on Indian culture. And when it has so much to offer, I do understand that culture is pluralistic. I do understand that there are many streams here. So there are many cultures, and each and every culture is so rich that it can contribute not just to the Indian education, but to the world's education. Even if it is pedagogy, this dialogic pedagogy that we talk about today, even the situated cognition, which Dr. Ravneet mentioned just now, has been talked about in the Eastern world before Christ, 600 years BC. So maybe in terms of technology, we need to sharpen our skills and competencies, and there we need to understand what technologies can be used to hone the skills and competencies that are required in today's technology-oriented world. So because this new education policy is a happy mix of the traditional issues, the traditional subjects, the traditional areas, that is, when I say traditional, the cultural, the local cultural content, and also the global. And the global is particularly about technology. It also mentions somewhere, if I can find it, I'll read it out, but it means that we need to hone our skills, not just the students, but teachers too, in data processing, in artificial intelligence, because most of the work now will be done by these machines. So maybe from that point of view, we need to train ourselves in these areas and maybe reach out to the countries who are more advanced than us. I'm not sure about that, because our IT professionals are the best in the world. So all I'm saying is that we have a lot of potential here in our country. And to me, this sounds contradiction. One may agree with it or not, but then it's one's choice, you know. And if you have any point, please raise that. So when it articulates its vision, and then it connects its vision. So in its vision, it talks about the importance of mathematics, computer science, and data science in conjugation with multidisciplinary abilities across the sciences, social sciences, humanities included. And then it also talks about the content, is how the content is interconnected. There are no boundaries in this content. So it is talking about a seamless knowledge, which is the way it exists in this world, which is the way we will understand it better, which is the way in which the learners will be able to use that knowledge base to solve the problems that they confront. So if I put knowledge in strict jackets, Like, for example, this is science and this is mathematics, or this is biology and this is mathematics. In the real world, our learners are going to encounter issues which involve both, which involve technology, which involve music. With technology, of course, music and technology are very, very closely connected. So just now I received a mail which talks about, which gives a good set of stories and explains how these stories can be used to teach mathematics. So because this is the way our children learn, they don't make divisions like this these divisions are not natural, as we know. So recognizing this, NEP also suggests that this knowledge should become seamless and it should become integrated. So what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to achieve integration of different content knowledge domains. This is a very big challenge. So the title, when I formulated the title, I had these things in mind. What are the challenges and what are the ambiguities? For us, this is a very big challenge. We have not been able to teach integrated science so far, even in our B.Ed program. So, and then after some time, we started giving up. Or what about the environmental science? There too, a lot of integration of different subjects in social science and sciences is required. That too, we've not been able to do very successfully. So this is a challenge today, and this is going to be a challenge till a few years from now. But when this whole thing is brought in the school, in the early education, I think we then naturally would become learners who are capable of synthesizing knowledge from different knowledge domains. When I talk of this synthesis, I am reminded of Howard Gardner, who I think his book today has become so relevant. I read it 10 years back. I think 5 Minds for Future, and my students who did MPhil with me may remember how I would mention about this book. And then he talks about the 5 minds that would be required in future. And those 5 minds is a disciplined mind, where he talks that we have to master a discipline or a craft, any discipline, any craft, any skill. We have to master it to the extent that we understand its structure. We know how to state problems, to conduct research in this discipline. We know how to solve the problem, how to solve these problems. So one doesn't become a master by doing a master's course or by getting a master's degree. So according to Howard Gardner, to acquire mastery of any subject, it takes at least 10 years. So you can understand what he means by mastery. Mastery is that you just master of it. The moment you confront or you come across a problem, you come across an issue, you have that wide knowledge base of the discipline that you are immediately able to think of something that is relevant to that problem. And the next point that I was mentioning was, and are able to synthesize content or knowledge or articulate it from different fields. So just having knowledge base in one discipline is not enough. We have to develop this ability to synthesize, do the synthesis of the information that we have acquired through the process of schooling into a meaningful whole. The third kind of mind that he talked about was a creating. He is creating, the one who is able to create. Creativity is one thing, that is a distinct thing in psychology, but a mind who is able to create. It requires, of course, it involves creativity, but he wants to emphasize the point that how do I create not just a solution, but also a problem? How can I create a problem which is important for us to look at today so that we are able to take care of several things that we may come across in future. So the ability to create new knowledge using creativity, using originality, using synthesis, whatever, but our learners should be enabled that they are able to create new knowledge. So creation of knowledge in today's time is extremely important. Oh, so there is a request that I should be bilingual. So, okay. I'll just switch over to Hindi, but let me finish this last part and then I'll explain the same thing in Hindi also. What I'm saying is that I'm talking about 5 minds for future, which Gardner has explained. And why am I talking about it? Because I see it in the NEP. That he talked about it in 2005. He was talking about it in 2005, that we are going to require these kinds of minds in future. Because I am really amazed at the predictions he had done. And all this, I think, as if this whole pandemic and this whole usage of chemical and biological warfare and was on his mind. In fact, in the preface, I think, or in the introductory chapter, he talks about how he gives a quote by Benjamin Franklin, who says that, let's all hang together, or most assuredly, we will hang separately. आज के टाइम में ये कितना रेलेवेंट हो गया है कि हमें इकट्ठे रहने से मतलब फिजिकली इनहैबिट नहीं करनी है इकट्ठी स्पेस, लेकिन एक तरह की थिंकिंग हमें अगर रखेंगे तो ही हम इस वर्ल्ड में सरवाइव कर पाएंगे। एक तरह की, इसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि प्लूरलिज्म को खत्म करना है, इसका मतलब ये है कि हम सब एक हैं और एक जने के अलग होने से the whole thing can collapse. If today we have an argument with another, we have a cross-border conflict and we want to use some nuclear weapons or we want to use biological weapons, you are most assuredly to be affected. So even you won't be spared. So let's all hang together, or most assuredly we will all be hanged together. So this is Benjamin Franklin writing in the previous century. But Howard Gardner starts with this thing, and therefore he says that these are the 5 minds which would be required for future. And I was talking about the creating mind, and then I think the most important 2 minds for me are the ones which I want to mention now. One is a respectful mind, the mind which respects other cultures, mind which respects all individuals, mind which respects different knowledge systems, so on and so forth. You can just go on and on and on in this. A respectful mind, and the last is an ethical mind. So coming from the West, it makes me very happy that respectful mind, ethical mind, a society which was like so much science oriented, reason oriented, rejected the ideas of did not even recognize the affective dimensions like feelings, that is respect, like ethics, because ethics is also in many ways related to feelings, did not recognize that. There was no space in their analysis, in their academic analysis or in their intellectual analysis. So reason is foremost. Emotions have to be shunned. If you look at the theories that you have studied in the behavioristic or even in the cognitive domain, emotions have not been taken into consideration. Even the information processing approach does not take emotion into consideration only when Norman talks about it, and then after that, now we have come a long way in this area. Having said this 5 minds, I will quickly give the crux in Hindi. Ravneet, is that okay? So मैं ये बात कर रही थी कि न्यू एजुकेशन पॉलिसी का जो विजन है, जो एक संकल्पना है, वो इतनी क्या बोलूं, बढ़िया, इतनी अच्छी है, वो इतनी जैसे कि एक स्वप्न, दिवा स्वप्न जैसी है। वो हमें अपील करती है। उसकी कुछ चीजों से हम सहमत नहीं हैं। जिन चीजों से हम सहमत नहीं हैं उसको हमने बार बार कह लिया है, और उसको बार बार कहने से समस्या का हल नहीं होने वाला। टीचर एजुकेटर्स या टीचर्स या हम सबकी ये जिम्मेदारी है कि हम उस समस्या को पॉइंट आउट करें और उस समस्या का समाधान ढूंढें। तो हमें उसके जो सॉल्यूशन है उसका हिस्सा बनना, ना केवल समस्या का ही हिस्सा बने रहना है। तो ऐसा कहा जाता है कि, ऐसा किसी ने कहा, लीगल सिस्टम में ये बड़ी आम बात है, show me the criminal and I'll tell you the crime. Not even the criminal, sorry, I'm wrongly quoting. Show me the person and I'll tell you the crime. ये सेंटेंस मैंने टीवी में सुना जब ये सुशांत सिंह राजपूत का केस आ रहा था कि आप ये बता दो किसको पिन डाउन करना है, तो क्राइम तो हम बता देंगे। मैं उससे ये कहना चाह रही हूं कि आप ये हमें बता दो कि क्या मुझे इस पॉलिसी को पुट डाउन करना है, तो मेरे पास पुट डाउन करने के लिए बहुत सारे मुद्दे हैं, वो मैं कर लूंगी। और अगर आप कह रहे हैं कि इसको हायर पेडेस्ट्रल पे ले जाना, तो वो भी मैं कर लूंगी। ये एक इंटेलेक्चुअल स्पोर्ट्स बन चुका है जो हम अपने एयर कंडीशन कमरों में करते हैं या हीटेड कमरों में करते हैं और डिटैच तरीके से करते हैं। जब हम ये सवाल कि इंडिया कभी सुधर नहीं सकता, तो क्या मतलब हम अपने आप को अलग कर लेते हैं। ये जो अपने आप को अलग करने वाला जो हमारा स्वभाव बनता जा रहा है, जो सिनिकल बना रहा है हमें, उस सिनिसिज्म को हमें एड्रेस करना है। तो मैं ये कह रही हूं कि हमारी जो भी अप्रोच है इसकी तरफ आप रिजेक्ट करें, बहुत सॉलिड आर्ग्यूमेंट्स दें, आप रिजेक्ट करें और स्टैंड बाय इट एंड गिव एन ऑल्टरनेटिव। अगर आप एक्सेप्ट करते हैं, क्या कमियां हैं पॉइंट आउट कीजिए, सोल्यूशन भी बताइए। हम कब से चाह रहे थे 3 लैंग्वेज फॉर्मूला होना चाहिए, 3 लैंग्वेज फॉर्मूला होना चाहिए, और हम कब से चाह रहे थे कि मदर टंग होनी चाहिए, लेकिन अब हमें इसमें भी अब प्रॉब्लम्स होने लगी हैं, तो वो रहेंगी। मैं उससे एक स्टेप आगे बढ़ना चाहती हूँ और मैं ये कह रही हूँ कि इसमें जो कहा गया है कि हमारा ऐसा विजन है कि हम ऐसे बच्चे या हम ऐसे इंडिविजुअल्स, ऐसे व्यक्ति नर्चर करें जिनमें साइंटिफिक टेम्पर हो, जिनमें क्रिटिकल थिंकिंग हो, जिनमें क्रिएटिविटी और ओरिजिनलिटी हो, जिनमें रोट मेमोरी की नहीं बल्कि प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व करने की क्षमता हो, जो एथिकल हो, जिनमें वैल्यूज हो, मूल्य हो, और जो दूसरों की तरफ संवेदना रखते हो, जो पूरी अपनी कम्युनिटी को, अपने देश को और इस वर्ल्ड को एक कुटुंब क्योंकि मानते हैं। ये हमारा ही कहा गया एक स्टेटमेंट है, हमारे यहां से निकला हुआ। तो इसके लिए जरूरी है कि हम ये सारी क्वालिटीज अपने लर्नर्स में नर्चर करें। इस दौरान मैंने ये भी कह दिया था कि क्योंकि हम चाहते तो ये हैं, लेकिन हमने कुछ और ऐसी सजेशंस दिए हैं जो इसको कॉन्ट्रडिक्ट करते हैं। मैं वो रिपीट नहीं करूंगी, लेकिन मैं जल्दी से ये बताऊंगी कि ये सारी जो क्वालिटीज हैं आज बहुत ही ज्यादा असेंशियल हो गई। हाँ, अब जो मैंने ये भी कहा कि हमें टेक्नोलॉजी में स्किलफुल होना पड़ेगा, हाँ, क्योंकि आगे का जमाना टेक्नोलॉजी पर ज्यादा निर्भर करेगा। हालांकि ये एनईपी कहती है कि, और राइटली सो कि एजुकेशन एक ह्यूमन रिलेशनशिप का प्रोसेस है। मुझे ये सेंटेंस उसका बहुत अच्छा लगा। एजुकेशन इज अ प्रोसेस ऑफ ह्यूमन रिलेशनशिप। Here we are talking about, we are emphasizing that this is the ultimate. The ultimate in education is human relationship. The ultimate in education, the ultimate in school is the teacher-child relationship. If we can set that right, I think rest we will achieve automatically. As those who have studied humanism know, reach, touch, and teach is a basic principle of education, is a basic principle of learning. Reach where? Reach out to the heart of the learners. जब तक मैं आपके हार्ट से, आपके इमोशन से, आपके सेल्फ से, आपके स्व से जुड़ नहीं पाती, तब तक आप मुझे अपने कॉग्निटिव वर्ल्ड में स्थान नहीं देते। और जब तक मैं उसमें स्थान नहीं पाऊंगी, मेरा आपको पढ़ाना, मेरा बच्चों को पढ़ाना बड़ा सुपरफिशियल रहेगा, उनकी मर्जी रहेगी वो वहां हैं या नहीं है मेंटली, आई मीन whether they're listening or they're not listening, or they agree with me or they don't agree with me. That's why I would like to repeat this sentence कि एक अच्छी क्लास वो है जहां बच्चा बड़े गर्व के, बड़े खुलकर ऐसा सवाल पूछे जो लोगों को बहुत स्टूपिड लगता हो। उसे कोई थ्रेट नहीं है, उसे कोई साइकोलॉजिकल थ्रेट नहीं है। वो ऐसी थ्रेट फ्री क्लास अगर हम क्रिएट करना चाहते हैं तो, या कर पाते हैं, तो ही ये सारी क्वालिटीज जो ये हमसे एक्सपेक्ट कर रहे हैं कि बच्चों में एम्पैथी हो, बच्चों में रिस्पेक्ट हो, और जो भी इस वैल्यू से रिलेटेड इन्होंने और एथिक्स की बात की है, वो तभी हम अचीव कर पाएंगे। इसे अचीव करने के लिए तो मैंने यहां तक बताने के बाद इस पर आई थी कि इस तरह के माइंड्स जो अब आज हम बात कर रहे हैं म्यूचुअल रिस्पेक्ट की, पहले तो हम कहते थे बड़ों की इज्जत करनी है, अब हम कहते हैं हर एक की, एम्फसाइज करते हैं हर एक की इज्जत करनी है। ये हर एक की इज्जत में पशु भी शामिल है और पौधे भी शामिल हैं, इंसान भी शामिल है। जब मैं कहती हूँ पौधों की इज्जत करना, तो मीन्स आई एम बीइंग environment friendly, I am being eco friendly. When I respect all living beings, only then I will be able to help in the sustenance of this universe. So the sustenance of this universe is dependent upon our own thinking and action. और as you know कि sustainable development में आपके यहाँ भी एक सेशन हुआ था और NEP में इसका बहुत मेंशन है, और उसके बिना तो हमारा सर्वाइवल ही नहीं है। ये तो एक पेंडेमिक है, ये निकलने के बाद और भी कई पेंडेमिक्स कहते हैं लाइन में लगे हुए हैं, जो कि क्योंकि हमें पानी की कमी होगी, हमें क्योंकि हमने इतने पेड़ पौधे काट दिए हैं तो हमने सॉइल डिप्लीट कर दिया है और हमने बहुत कुछ कर दिया है। यदि हम ये सब, जब हम ये सब करते हैं तो कितनी सारी इस प्लैनेट की स्पीशीज एलिमिनेट हो गई हैं। कहते हैं कि 85% वर्टिब्रेट्स एलिमिनेट हो गए, एक्सटिंक्ट हो गए हैं। मेरे ये डेटा पर्सनली चेक नहीं किया है, मैंने एक लेक्चर में सुना है। तो ह्यूमन एक्टिविटी से इतनी सारी स्पीशीज लॉस हो रही है। ये पेंडेमिक, ये कोरोना वायरस अब ह्यूमन स्पीशीज पर एक अटैक है। इस तरह के और अटैक्स ना हो, उसके लिए जरूरी है कि we start respecting. Respect should become part and parcel of our personality. So this is what is emphasized in different ways in this NEP. It's not talking about the pandemic, but it is talking about the values. These are the values. So इस connection में मैंने ये कहा था कि हावर्ड गार्डनर ने 2005 में जब 5 Minds for Future टाइटल किताब लिखी थी, तो उन्होंने ये जो 5 माइंड्स हमें जरूरत पड़ेगी जिनकी फ्यूचर में, वो है डिसिप्लिन्ड माइंड, जो किसी भी विषय वस्तु में बिल्कुल पारंगत है। पारंगत इज द राइट वर्ड। मास्टरी तभी आएगी जब आप उसमें बिल्कुल हर तरह की प्रॉब्लम्स को सॉल्व कर सकते हैं, बिल्कुल पारंगत है। दूसरा माइंड वो है जो डिफरेंट, जिसमें ये क्षमता हो कि वो डिफरेंट नॉलेज डोमेन्स की इंफॉर्मेशन को सिंथेसाइज करके एक नई अंडरस्टैंडिंग बनाए, वो नई अंडरस्टैंडिंग जिसकी हमें जरूरत होगी। तो आज भी वो हम देख रहे हैं कि अब हम, और ये तभी संभव है जब हम इंटीग्रेटेड अप्रोच से पढ़ाएं। आज हमें जिन स्किल्स की जरूरत है उसमें ना तो हम टेक्नोलॉजी को छोड़ सकते हैं बाहर, ना मैथ्स को छोड़ सकते हैं, ना साइंस को छोड़ सकते हैं, ना लैंग्वेज को छोड़ सकते हैं, और ना ही आर्ट, म्यूजिक, क्राफ्ट, थिएटर, सेल्फ डेवलपमेंट जैसी चीजों को छोड़ सकते हैं। क्योंकि मेरी मेंटल हेल्थ या किसी की भी मेंटल हेल्थ इन सभी चीजों पे निर्भर करती है। सो आई थिंक दिस सेल्फ डेवलपमेंट, जिसको हमने अनफॉर्चुनेटली माइंडफुलनेस कह रहे हैं, अनफॉर्चुनेटली इसलिए कह रही हूँ कि सेल्फ डेवलपमेंट की बात तो हमारे यहाँ सेंचुरी से होती है, और उसमें अभी रिसेंटली मैंने सुना कि ये जो ब्रीदिंग एक्सरसाइजेस हम करते हैं, जो हमारे कल्चर में सेंचुरीज से हैं, आई थिंक इवन बिफोर क्राइस्ट ब्रीदिंग को जो इम्पोर्टेंस दी है, वो आज हमें यूएसए में जो रिसर्च हुई एक यूनिवर्सिटी में, वो बता रहे हैं कि अगर आप एक प्रकार की ब्रीदिंग करते हैं तो आपका मूड एक तरह का होता है, दूसरे प्रकार की ब्रीदिंग करते हैं तो दूसरे तरह का मूड होता है। फिजियोलॉजी तो छोड़ ही दीजिए, फिजियोलॉजी तो बदलती है। अगर आप शैलो ब्रीदिंग कर रहे हैं तो आपके लंग्स को प्रॉपर ऑक्सीजन नहीं मिलती है, डीप ब्रीदिंग करेंगे तो लंग्स को ऑक्सीजन मिलेगी। ये तो चलो सिंपल मेडिसिन और मेडिकल साइंस हो गई या साइंस हो गई, लेकिन हाउ इज इट अफेक्टिंग आवर इमोशंस, how is it affecting our well-beings? So earlier, this was just shunned by the scientists over there, that look at this whole yoga where they're emphasizing so much on breathing. Breathe this way, ये nostril बंद करो, वो nostril बंद करो, ऐसे पैटर्न होना है। लेकिन अब वो खुद मान रहे हैं, ना सिर्फ मान रहे हैं, उसमें ये भी बताया गया कि अब ये लोग अपने फौज को, अपने आर्मी को, जब वो स्ट्रेसफुल सिचुएशंस में होती है, जब किस तरह की स्ट्रेसफुल सिचुएशन में होगी तो कैसी ब्रीदिंग करनी है। तो जब आप बहुत थ्रेटनिंग, डेंजरस सिचुएशन में है तो किस तरह का आपकी ब्रीदिंग होनी चाहिए, जिससे कि आपकी कामनेस बनी रहे, आप काम रह करके एक इंटेलिजेंट डिसीजन ले पाए, और एक इंटेलिजेंट डिसीजन लेने के बाद करेज के साथ उसको एनेक्ट कर पाए। यही जरूरत है ना, होती है उस वक्त, उसकी डिमांड भी यही होती है उस सिचुएशन की। तो कहना मैं ये सिर्फ चाह रही हूं कि किस तरह से घूम के हमारे पास चीजें आई हैं, और उसके कारण कई हैं। तो उसी तरह से मुझे लगता है कि रिस्पेक्टफुल माइंड और एथिकल माइंड भी घूम कर हमारे पास आए हैं। हम तो पहले से ही इन चीजों को बहुत वैल्यू देते हैं, लेकिन अब हम ये कह रहे हैं लेट्स ऑल हैंग टुगेदर और वील ऑल हैंग सेपरेटली। वसुदेव कुटुंबकम, जब ये हमारा क्या बोलूं फ्रेज है या हमारा मूल मंत्र है, तो इस मंत्र के हिसाब से हम हर एक से कनेक्टेड हैं। अब इतना रिसेंट भी नहीं है, क्योंकि ये जुड़ा हुआ है जो मैं आगे कहने वाली हूँ, इसलिए मैं थोड़ा सा और बताऊंगी कि रिसेंटली बड़े फेमस साइकोलॉजिस्ट जो हैं सुधीर कक्कड़, उन्होंने एथिक्स के एरिया को एक्सप्लोर किया है, और अगर आप वेबसाइट पर जाएंगे तो उनके आर्टिकल्स आपको मिलेंगे, एटलीस्ट एक दो तो मैंने ही देखे हैं, और उन्होंने लेक्चर भी दिया था दिल्ली यूनिवर्सिटी में। तो सेंटर फॉर साइंस एंड एथिक्स करके जो सेंटर है दिल्ली यूनिवर्सिटी में, वहां पे उन्होंने लेक्चर दिया था। तो इतनी इंटरेस्टिंग बात वो उन्होंने शुरू ही यहां से किया कि एथिक्स, अगर हमें एथिक्स, पहला वो कहने लगे कि एथिक्स क्या है, मैं इस पर बोलूंगा, और दूसरा कि एथिक्स को हम एजुकेशन में कैसे लाएं, एथिक्स क्या है, उसकी एसेंशियलिटी क्या है। सो उसका टाइटल भी शायद एसेंशियल्स ऑफ एथिक्स है। तो उसकी एसेंशियलिटी क्या है, क्यों जरूरत है हमें एथिक्स की आज? तो इसका कारण तो मैं बता चुकी हूँ कि क्यों हमें जरूरत है एथिक्स की आज, रिस्पेक्ट की आज. आई एम नॉट गोइंग टू रिपीट दैट, बट व्हाट सुधीर कक्कड़ हैज सेड, he says कि when we used to say that all the religions talk about the golden rule. गोल्डन रूल क्या है? क्या कोई मुझे बताना चाहता है कि गोल्डन रूल क्या है हमारे जीवन का? गोल्डन रूल हर रिलीजन ने अपनी अपने तरीके से बोला है. तो वो सारे जो वो मुझे बताने की, ऐसा एक एक करके बताने की जरूरत नहीं है. तो हम कहते हैं कि अब डू टू द नेबर दैट यू वांट टू बी डन टू योरसेल्फ. अपने साथ ऐसे व्यवहार करो जैसा कि आप चाहते हैं कि वो आपके साथ करें. तो रेसिप्रोकल, दिस इज रेसिप्रोसिटी. वी आर एक्सपेक्टिंग अ रेसिप्रोसिटी बिटवीन just few people, between just neighbors, or maybe then it expands to the community, then it may expand to the society, and it may expand to the world. So इस golden rule को कई तरीकों से कहा गया है. अंत में अगर टाइम होगा और आप चाहेंगे तो मैं वो पढ़ दूंगी उनके आर्टिकल में क्या क्या लिखा हुआ है, और उन्होंने सभी रिलीजन्स में किस तरह से इसे एक्सप्रेस किया गया है ये बताया है, और इंडियन फिलॉसफी में उसको कैसे कहा गया है ये भी बताया है कि वैदिक संस्कृति में उसे कैसे बताया गया है. उसका सबसे बड़ा एक्सपेंस है कि उसमें पूरा यूनिवर्स कवर्ड है. डू टू अदर्स, अगर मान लो इसको मैं यूनिवर्स को अप्लाई करती हूँ तो मैं यूनिवर्स के साथ वो करूं जो मैं चाहती हूँ कि यूनिवर्स मेरे साथ करे. अगर मुझे पानी चाहिए, अगर मुझे बारिश चाहिए, अगर मुझे पेट भरने के लिए खाना चाहिए, जो मुझे यूनिवर्स से मिलेगा तो मैं भी यूनिवर्स के साथ वो ही करूं. नहीं तो ये रेसिप्रोसिटी. सो मैं इस पूरे यूनिवर्स का एक, और यही बात विवेकानंद ने भी कही. तो जिसको जो पसंद है, चाहे वो कबीर की बात ले लो, चाहे सिखिज्म ले लो, हर एक जो हमारी ये, पता नहीं इसको रिलीजन तो नहीं कहना चाहिए, लेकिन जो समूह हैं, जो कोहोर्ट्स हैं, इन्होंने इनको किसी न किसी तरीके से कहा है. सुधीर कक्कड़ ये कहते हैं कि यदि मैं ये कहता कि ये सारे ग्रंथ ऐसा बोलते हैं तो आज का हमारा जो यूथ है या आज के हमारे जो लर्नर्स हैं वो सुनेंगे नहीं. वो पूछेंगे क्या आपके पास साइंटिफिक बेसिस है, क्या आप इसको प्रूव कर सकते हैं, क्या आपके पास, मैं इसको वेरीफाई कैसे करूं. He begins his talk by saying this, and then very beautifully he gives an account of recent researches done in the field of medicine, in the field of neuroscience, in the field of endocrinology, which explain this. So please tell me when the time you think when the time is approaching. तो उन्होंने बहुत अच्छे से रिसर्चेस बताई कि पहली रिसर्च जो वो कोट करते हैं वही कहते हैं कि उन्होंने यूएस में हुई है ये रिसर्च. उसमें 2 ग्रुप्स थे. 2 ग्रुप्स में मदर्स जो अपने बच्चों को फीड कर रही थी, तो वो उन मदर्स के 2 ग्रुप्स बनाए और उनको बच्चे को फीड करते वक्त या करवाते वक्त एक ग्रुप को ऐसा वीडियो दिखाया या फिल्म दिखाई जिसमें लोग एक दूसरे की मदद कर रहे हैं, और एक दूसरे ग्रुप को वीडियो दिखाई जो कार्टून्स थे, एंटरटेनिंग थी, फनी थी. तो ये पाया गया, नाउ दिस इज अ साइंटिफिक रिसर्च, ये पाया गया कि जिन्होंने इस तरह के प्रो सोशल वीडियो देखा कि दूसरों को मदद कर रहे हैं, उनका मिल्क फ्लो, उनका लैक्टेशन बढ़ गया, उनका लैक्टेशन बढ़ गया. और इधर जो दूसरा ग्रुप था उसका लैक्टेशन सेम रहा, न्यूट्रल. दैट वाज न्यूट्रल। फिर इस तरह के एक्सपेरिमेंट्स उन्होंने और किए और कनेक्ट किया उसको। वो तो ये भी क्लेम करते हैं साइंटिस्ट कि इसका हमारे जीवन की लॉन्जेविटी से कनेक्शन है। सो किसी ने ऐसा आई थिंक इन क्रिश्चियनिटी ये स्टेटमेंट है कि ओ लॉर्ड मेक मी द गिवर द हेल्पर एंड नॉट द वन एंड नॉट द रिसीवर। मुझे आप गिवर बनाइए, रिसीवर नहीं। बट इसका अब साइंस ने क्या पाया? साइंस हैज फाउंड दैट when you help others, there is a change in your hormonal system. You secrete those hormones which improve your well-being. So it makes you happy. It elevates your emotions. So givers, and it also says that it affects the overall health and longevity of that person. So giver receives more than the receiver. किसी को हेल्प चाहिए, उसको हेल्प मिली, बट उसने वो रिसीव नहीं किया जो गिवर ने रिसीव किया। ये रिसर्च से पता चला और ये आई थिंक सेकेंड डेकेड ऑफ दिस सेंचुरी से में पता चला है। लेकिन अब आप देखें पीछे जाएं तो ये कब से, यानी कि कितनी सदियों पहले से सबने कहा, लेकिन क्योंकि हम आज रीजन को ही मानते हैं और इसीलिए हमें जरूरत पड़ती है, सुधीर कक्कड़ कहते हैं इसलिए जरूरत पड़ती है कि हम ये रिसर्च अपने यंगस्टर्स को बताएं ताकि वो कन्विंस हों कि कुछ चीजें जो हमारी कोर वैल्यूज हैं, जो और जिसमें प्रो सोशल बिहेवियर बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, वो हमें सीखना या बच्चों में नर्चर करना। मुझे सीखना वर्ड इसके लिए यूज करना ठीक नहीं लगता, नर्चर करना बेटर लगता है। अब क्योंकि इसका बहुत सारा मेंशन है एनईपी में और क्योंकि ये फाउंडेशनल स्टेज पे है और क्योंकि इसके बारे में ज्यादा बात नहीं की गई है कि इसको कैसे अचीव करना है, इसीलिए मैं इस पे एक्सपेंड करूंगी। जैसा कि मैंने शुरू में ही कहा था कि मैं बहुत कंस्ट्रक्टिव तरीके से आगे बढ़ना चाहती हूँ। तो हम सब ने पियाजे पढ़ा है, कोलबर्ग पढ़ा है, हमने एरिक्सन भी पढ़ा और यूंग भी पढ़ा है, शायद यूंग भी पढ़ा हो। लेकिन हम ये जानते हैं कि पियाजे ने ये कहा कि हम सिर्फ रिफ्लेक्सेस लेकर पैदा होते हैं, जो हमारा कॉग्निटिव अपरेटस है। हमारा जो कॉग्निटिव और इमोशनल अपरेटस है वो सिर्फ रिफ्लेक्सेस है, और रिफ्लेक्सेस तो ऑटोमेटिक रिस्पॉन्स सिस्टम है। और हमारी मेमोरी नहीं होती है, मीन्स हमारा कॉग्निटिव स्ट्रक्चर ही नहीं है। सो इन मेनी वेज देन ही एग्रीज विद जॉन लॉक, who says that we are in the beginning tabula rasa, clean slate. Now interestingly, Piaget takes the categories of thoughts from the Kantian ideas. तो उन्होंने जो उनकी रिसर्च की है, उन्होंने नंबर पे, वेलोसिटी पे, कंजर्वेशन पे, वो तो सारी कांटियन आइडिया से लिए। 12 कैटेगरीज ऑफ थॉट इफ यू रिमेंबर, and if you forget I'm not going to leave you. So जो 12 कैटेगरीज ऑफ थॉट की हम बार बार बात करते थे, ये हमारी इंफॉर्मेशन प्रोसेसिंग मैकेनिज्म with which we are endowed. We're endowed with those categories of thought. वो हमारे innate हैं. But Piaget accepted those categories as knowledge categories, and when he conducted his research with children, he took these as basis to find out assimilation, accommodation, equilibration, and interiorization and evolution of knowledge. हम सब जानते हैं, उन्होंने कहा है कि knowledge is self-evolving. There's no, knowledge or intelligence, because he uses it synonymously. There is no final point to that. More you experience, more you reorganize your cognitive structure, more you do the integration of the different cognitive structures, and better you are equipped to understand this world. And he goes on, because what is after all intelligence? It manifests itself only after the interaction of our biological structures with the environmental characteristics. This is what is intelligence for him. Am I clear? If this is intelligence, then obviously it is endless. जब तक आप जीवित हैं, जब तक आप में your senses are working, you are gaining more and more. You are reorganizing at least. You cannot create, you may not be creating new structures, because after formal operation stage, maybe, you know, that's the point where our intelligence stops, because at the peak, according to him. But within those structures, within those schema and schemata, we can do reorganization of this, find new connections and solve new problems. This is how he is explained.
Yes,
I made two.
I'm sorry, ma'am. Like we are actually now almost the time is approaching.
Okay.
So if you could, because we also want to keep the last 7 minutes for question and answers.
I do understand. I'm
really enjoying. Like I'm sure all of us are really enjoying this session. But
yeah.
also,
So that's okay. I'll just do the winding up.
Thank you.
I want to make this point that we must understand that today Piaget's assumptions are in question. That is, we are born as clean slate. No, we're not. We have some innate propensities, innate tendencies, and those are the pro-social qualities that we are born with. मैं ये point यहाँ पे लाना चाहती हूँ. We are born with the concepts. We are born with certain concepts. Elliptical. We're born with the ability to discriminate. You don't have to teach an infant to discriminate, because you have seen this. When a new face comes in front of the baby howls, the baby cries. The baby is able to discriminate between a friend, between a caregiver and a stranger. And a stranger is perceived threat to the child's life. Therefore the baby cries, because crying is a signal of discomfort. So we know that now, we accept that this is innate. Also, the dual inheritance theory tells us that, where Maslow has compared human behavior with chimpanzees, with the last primates. And he has found that humans are fundamentally different, because when they're born, they are born with the, ability, or with the structure for prosociality. In prosociality, he takes examples of helping others, of sharing things with others, of informing others when they are in danger. So all these are aspects which have been seen right from the early man to today. And in a longitudinal study, which was done in CIE very recently, it has been found that a cross-sectional research design was used, and it was found that the toddlers, then the 6-year-old, the 4-year-old, they were all showing pro-social behavior. So to this, I will end by saying that in the foundational period and in the preparatory stage, we have to enable what is already within the child. So these qualities are within children. You must have seen babies informing you, helping you when something drops, and the baby comes crawling and picks it up and give it to you. If you're feeding the baby wants to feed you also. It was found in this research that they were willing to share even something which they loved so much with somebody else. So where is this coming from? If you look at Piaget's work, at this stage, they are in sensory motor stage. They don't have cognitive structure. They don't have memory. Even when they come over to concrete operational stage, the child is egocentric. Therefore, to comprehend that the other person also wants what I have is not possible. Therefore, there is this development over and above. So I'm not rejecting Piaget's work. I really like and teach Piaget with a lot of passion and with commitment and having faith in it. But we always move ahead. Knowledge has been ever evolving. And we have now found that there are these characteristics, certain qualities, certain features, certain abilities are innate to us. We are not born as tabula rasa. And my response to the NEP's requirement for the foundational and the pre-preparatory stage is that be careful of, be conscious of what is there in the child, and not, and even, and don't commit even a mistake in recognizing that. You cannot be, you see, हम जानते हैं कि एक छोटी सी बात बच्चे को कैसे लग सकती है. ह्यूमंस हैं, एरर्स होगा, हम एरर होते हैं हमें, लेकिन हम जितना कॉन्शियस होंगे, जितना ज्यादा कॉन्शियस होंगे, हम एरर्स करेंगे. Of course, it requires patience. It requires a lot of love and connectivity with the learners to understand what is within them. जो उनके अंदर निहित है, उसे पहचानना हमारे लिए सबसे ज्यादा जरूरी है, और उसे नर्चर करना. हमें 3 hours नहीं पढ़ाने हैं उनको फाउंडेशनल स्टेज पे, लेकिन जो वो बोल रहे हैं, मे बी उसको हम और अगर चाहे तो रिफाइन करें या ना करें. वी शुड जस्ट let them be and accept them as they are, whatever the differences. Accept them as they are, let them be, let what is within them flourish, flower, come out. And then in the preparatory stage, it has also been found, by the way, that if you start giving reinforcement for their natural pro-social behavior, it decreases. It is so interesting, it decreases. So there's no need to give them external reinforcers. वो जो हमारा स्वभाव है, उस स्वभाव के हिसाब से हम बिहेव करते हैं. हमारा स्वभाव है प्रो सोशल होना, उसे उस स्वभाव से ही हमें बिहेव करने दीजिए, हमें मौके दीजिए, और उसको रोकने की कोशिश न करें. डोंट शेयर, अपना होमवर्क खुद करो, अपना खाना शेयर नहीं करना. जब हम बच्चों को कुछ इस तरह की बातें बोलते हैं तो हम उसे सिखाना शुरू करते हैं. People are born good. This is what Thomas Lowe talks about. And this is what we've been talking about. Most of the religion talk about this only. We're not Pashu, we're not born as Pashu. We have a, whatever you want to say, we have a conscience, and we need to nurture that. I'll stop here. And I was able to address just one part, but I think that was, to me, that was the most important part.
And we will definitely would like to hear you again today. Sorry for the paucity of time. We had to interrupt you. We have a couple of questions, if you would like to take that.
Sure.
The first question is from Ms. Priti Chauhan. She has asked, in the kind of divisiveness that we see around presently, can we expect divisiveness that exists presently, the divisive society that is saying that is there currently, can we expect children to inculcate values of respect, harmony, and ethics that is being that the teachers are trying to inculcate?
Maybe it's Preeti.
Yeah.
So Preeti, what is the choice? We can't do away with it. It is a must. Now, we have to do it. How we do it, we'll have to find out. Now, in Sudhir Kakkar's work, he's also quoted research where he says that, as I was saying, that children recognize familiar faces of the community. इसका क्या मतलब है? इसका मतलब ये है कि अगर हम ऐसी सोसाइटी में पैदा हुए हैं जहां पे सब लोग ब्राउन कलर के हैं, तो कितने भी ब्राउन कलर के लोग जब बच्चे के सामने आते हैं तो वो कुछ नहीं करता, वो ठीक रहता है. लेकिन जैसे ही कोई बहुत फेयर या कोई बहुत डार्क आएगा तो उसके रिस्पॉन्स से, उसके चेहरे के रिस्पॉन्स से, उसकी हार्ट बीट से, उसकी सकिंग मोमेंट से हमें पता चलता है कि वो पहचान रहा है कि ये कोई और है, ये एक अलग स्टिमुलस है। ये एबिलिटी टू डिस्क्रिमिनेट हमारी सर्वाइवल के लिए जरूरी थी, इसीलिए नेचर ने हम में डाली। अगर हम, जैसे कई बच्चे ना फियर्स डॉग के साथ भी अगर वो खेलना शुरू कर दें या फियर्स एनिमल्स के साथ भी वो खेलना शुरू कर देंगे तो उनका सर्वाइवल थ्रेटेंड है। तो हमें ग्रेजुअली बच्चे को ये सीखना होता है कि मैं उन दो चीजों को अलग से देख पाऊं, स्ट्रेंजर्स को, फ्रेंड्स को, वेल विशर्स को, या जो लोग मुझे हार्म पहुंचाना चाहते हैं उनको। इसलिए ये हमारे लिए एक सर्वाइवल प्रोसेस है। ना होता तो कुछ हमें प्रॉब्लम्स लेटर में ना आती। इसमें ये भी रिसर्च में पाया गया कि जो कॉस्मोपॉलिटन स्टेट्स हैं वहां पे हर तरह के लोग बच्चा देखता है, इन्फेंट देखता है, तो उसकी एडजस्टेबिलिटी बेटर होती है। तो उसको आदत पड़ जाती है कि अलग अलग कलर्स के हैं लोग, तो वो एडजस्ट करता है। और ये हमने पियाजे चाहे हमें बोले ऑब्जेक्ट परमानेंस 8 मंथ में होता है, लेकिन अब तो मैं 2 महीने के बच्चे में ही देखती हूँ कि वो ही व्हेन द मदर गोज अवे द बेबी स्टार्ट्स क्राइंग। So the mother moving out from the experiential field of the child and somebody else entering. So maybe with due respect to him, times have changed. His work is now little more than a century old, or a century old, not more than, but a century old. And you will agree with me, the way human life is progressing, जिससे सुनो वो कहते हैं कि आजकल के बच्चे पालना बहुत मुश्किल है, या वो इतने स्मार्ट है, इतने इंटेलिजेंस है। हम लोग तो जब छोटे थे चुपचाप बैठ जाते थे, ये बच्चे तो एक जगह बैठते ही नहीं है। सो ऑल दीज काइंड्स ऑफ स्टोरीज वी लिसन हियर। सो व्हाट आई वाज ट्राइंग टू से दैट दीज आर सम नेचुरल टेंडेंसीज विद इन अस। To Preeti, I have to say that we have a natural tendency to be affiliated, to be altruistic. We have a natural tendency to be affiliative and to be altruistic, but we also have a natural tendency to be aggressive and antagonistic. ये चारों चीजें हम में हैं। हम एक्सेप्टिंग भी हैं और एंटेगोनिस्टिक भी हैं। हम प्यार भी करते हैं और हम, ये सारी इमोशंस हम में हैं, क्योंकि ये हमारे सर्वाइवल के लिए, ह्यूमन सर्वाइवल के लिए एक टाइम पे बहुत जरूरी था। तो अगर आपने कुछ एंथ्रोपोलॉजी में कुछ स्टडीज देखी हो तो आपको पता होगा कि जो डिफरेंट ट्राइब्स हैं आज भी अपने कोई ना कोई साइंस उनके होते हैं। उनके झंडे अलग हैं, उनके जो कोई बीड्स पहनता है, कोई कुछ और पहनता है कि हम इस ट्राइब को बिलोंग करते हैं। और इंटर ट्राइब कॉन्फ्लिक्ट्स बहुत होते हैं, जो अब ये इसलिए है कि उस वक्त ये सर्वाइवल का मुद्दा रहा होगा, या उस वक्त ये इनब्रीडिंग का मुद्दा रहा होगा इन द स्टोन एज, इन द अर्ली एज। लेकिन आज जब हम सब इकट्ठे रहते हैं, ये जो हमारी नेचुरल टेंडेंसीज हैं, इसको एजुकेशन से हमें चैनलाइज करने की जरूरत है, इसको अकल्चरेट करने की जरूरत है। अगर मेरे में एंटागोनिस्टिक टेंडेंसीज है तो मेरे में एफिलिएटिव टेंडेंसीज भी हैं। ये एजुकेशन पे, ये टीचर पे, ये फैमिली पे डिपेंड करता है कि वो किन टेंडेंसीज को प्रायोरिटी देके नर्चर करती है। और अगर आपको और आगे इसके समझना हो तो हम आगे, if you have read Bandura, you can go there also. But what I'm saying is that your question is very valid. It's a difficult question because you're talking about the current picture, about the current scene. Yes, but we have to make a beginning. Therefore, it is important to, address this issue upfront in the class. Address this issue. Why do we antagonize people? Why do we discriminate? उसकी बात करें। बात करने के बाद, it is only the dialogue which helps straighten the relationship. जब हमारा dialogue बंद हो जाता है तो relationship stiff हो जाता है। This is all I have to say. I don't know whether I've satisfied Preeti.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, there's another question, but I think this you have already addressed in the midst of your talk. So actually, I think we will not be taking any more questions because the next speaker is already here, and maybe definitely we'd like you to invite you again and listen, carry
You
forward
can,
the discussion.
I'll be happy to answer these questions if you can mail me.
Yeah, definitely, ma'am. We will do
I'll
that.
mail it to you, Manisha, Ravneet, आप लोगों को मैं जवाब भेज दूंगी.
ठीक है, ma'am.
References भेज दूंगी कि वो पढ़ेंगे तो हमें. So I hope, Ravneet, I've done justice to
Definitely.
your request.
Yes, ma'am. Like formally would like to thank you for you have presented a very integrate analysis of the new policy document NEP 2020, and not simply critiquing it or dwelling on the ambiguities and the challenges, but you have also suggested what can be the way forward in terms
Yes,
of
yes.
a humane education. And I think it was a very noble way of looking at the policy through the lens of cognitive learning. And I'm sure as much as I have enjoyed the session, I'm sure the participants have also done that. So thank you so much, ma'am. And
Thank you for inviting me. Thanks for inviting me.
yes, ma'am. Now I would
And
request Ravneet ma'am to take over. Thank you, ma'am, again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Manisha Subba. Thanks a lot, Professor Baveja, for being with us and giving us insights into the policy as well as the way ahead. And Dr. Manisha has rightly put it that it was a thoroughly enjoyable presentation. So
thank
not
you.
just learning, but enjoying while learning was the most important thing for us. Thank you so much, ma'am.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And now we have the privilege that Professor Poonam Batra has also joined us. She is the next speaker for today. Ma'am, I welcome you on behalf of Mata Sundari College as well as Hari Singh Gaur University. And now I would request Dr. Radhika Menon from our department to please facilitate the next session.
Thank you so much, and hello, Radhika.
Hello, how are you?
I'm
so
good,
glad
good.
to have listened to you. Thank you for that
Nice.
presentation.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks.
Hello, Bharti.
Hi, Poonam. Oh, I didn't see you.
Good
How are
to
you?
see you.
Yeah,
I'm well, thank you. Yeah, how are you?
I'm good, good. As you can see me, as good as one can be.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay,
if we
please.
can,
Okay.
if we can start the next session.
Yes.
Maybe start the next session then.
Sure, Radhika ma'am.
Radhika, so
This is the fourth session of the fourth day of the faculty development program, which began on the 18th of October 2020. This faculty development program is on teachers, teaching and teacher education, and is being organized by Mata Sundari College for Women, University of Delhi, in collaboration with Teaching Learning Center of Social Sciences, Dr. Hari Singh Gaur Vishwavidyalaya. This one-week interdisciplinary faculty development program is being held under the aegis of Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya National Mission on Teachers and Teaching. Today we have with us Professor Poonam Batra, who will be speaking to us on questions of identity and the self in the preparation of teachers. Professor Batra requires very little introduction because she's one of the most prominent names in the area of teacher education. But to just give an indication of the various kinds of work that she's been doing, she is both an academic and an institution builder. And the framework of BLED was developed by Professor Batra, and to date is one of the most the premier teacher education programs. And it is a 4-year teacher education program that has been there for several years now. Professor Batra is a professor of education at the Central Institute of Education, University of Delhi. Her work spans multiple areas of knowledge: public policy in education, curriculum and pedagogy, social psychology of education, teacher education, and gender studies. Professor Batra was a Nehru Memorial Fellow and member of the Indian Supreme Court's Commission on Teacher Education and co-author of key education policy documents. Her recent research examines coloniality in the episteme of Indian education reform, comparative education imperatives, and the politics of school and teacher education reform. She is associated with the Global Challenges Research Fund and is the India lead for transforming education for sustainable futures project. It is a great pleasure for me to welcome Professor Batra. Professor Batra has been speaking on this subject for a while now. And if you were to look up YouTube, there will be several videos where she has highlighted the important elements of the education policy and the areas that we need to pay attention to. I would like to welcome you, Madam, once again to this faculty development program. And we look forward to listening to you.
Thank you, Radhika. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And thank you, Ravneet, for asking me to come today to speak to all of you. So I'm assuming that this is not a program that is focusing exclusively on relating matters of teachers and teacher education to policy. So the subject of my talk today is a little soft, I would say. It's largely within looking at issues of the self and identity, especially as we engage with the whole idea of teacher preparation, teacher development. And I must sort of point out that the beard was not just my creation. I have the tenacity to stay with it for many, many years, but it was a creation of a large number of people from within CIE and outside in several universities, schools, colleges. So I just like to sort of add that, because the more the people engaged with the program, the richer it became. And that's why it has been acclaimed as a good program. So let me begin by saying that basically, if we look at questions of identity and self with regard to teachers and their development, I think what comes to my mind first is the fact that we are acknowledging, when we look at issues of identity and self, the fact that subjectivities are significant, that subjectivity itself is not a bad word, as scientists would have us believe for many, many years, and that subjectivities have been for a long time, even within the field of education, which is about people. It's been sort of set aside in the hope that we're actually talking about education that's objective, we're talking about knowledge that is objective, and that education itself is postured as something neutral, as value-free. And I want to sort of assert that this is one of the most fundamental problematics of education itself. Because, you know, we are engaging not with the teaching of chemistry and history and geography and interdisciplinary knowledges, but we're engaged with people. And if we're engaged with people, I think subjectivity becomes very central. So not only would school teachers be engaging with young people and older people, but we as teacher educators engage with adults when we are trying to prepare teachers. And therefore, this is my first sort of submission. And specifically, if we see in more recent sort of years, we see that the kind of assertions in the space of education, you know, assertions which are largely very ideological in nature, assertions in the space of education, in the space of culture, in popular consciousness. All these assertions clearly indicate to us that education is far from being neutral, because there are very clear attempts being made to actually bring certain colors to the way we look at the world, to the way we our reality. And there are very systematic attempts being made. So I think these recent assertions, if anything else, tells us very clearly that we do need to look at education from the stance of how political it can become. And therefore, it does play a very critical role in developing the self, in developing identities, in shaping people's identities. Now, having established the criticality of self and identity in teacher preparation in a very sort of cursory manner at the moment, I'd like to point to the fact that it was for the first time in any teacher preparation program that we were able to bring in concepts of self and the development of self and examining identities and the development and shaping of identities in a teacher education program. And that happened through the Bachelors of Elementary Education, when in the 1990s, to be precise, 94, when we started the program, we were able to bring in not only theoretical engagement through courses like human relations and communication, where we examine questions of identity, but we were also able to bring in aspects of the development of the self, specifically the teacher who we were trying to prepare to go to schools and teach. And the idea there was that you cannot talk of identity or of the self and the other in merely theoretical terms. That it becomes important that we look at self in the context that we are in the context that we see the other in. And I think these contexts and the positioning of people in society become very important sort of aspects in engaging with these questions. So it was the first time that we were able to bring some sort of, ideas of this kind into the formal space of preparing teachers. And I do remember that there was a lot of resistance and also a lot of questioning, intellectual questioning, as to how and why the need to talk about self. Because it was, people actually believed very strongly, and these are some of the most well-known people in the world of education, that once you have a good grasp over the knowledge that you want to teach, whether it's in the area of social sciences or sciences, that itself makes you a competent, a person with enough confidence in yourself, with enough sense of security to be able to engage with people and to teach. But to my mind, there's always this thing lurking that if at all we are speaking about enabling teachers to empower their learners, whatever age that may be, in higher education or in school education, I think the teacher herself needs to engage with issues that make her feel empowered. The teacher herself has to engage with her feelings, her own understanding of life, her worldview of life, in order to really be able to have the impact of empowering another. And I think that was the key which led us to include some of these ideas in the Bachelors of Elementary Education program, knowing fully well, of course, and notwithstanding the fact that education alone can do little, can do precious little, because we do have huge systemic structures and the kind of larger frames, whether it's the economic policies or the development trajectories that a country may take, that impact the way education also gets shaped. And therefore, we were very aware that education alone will not be able to achieve, but education is a space which does require an intervention of a more sort of proactive kind, rather than look at it as a very neutral space. Now, if we try and look at the policy texts, let's say, before this new policy has come up, even commission reports, we find that in the 1980s, when the Chattopadhyay Commission came in 1983-85, that is when the idea of the teacher as a critical agent in education did sort of get articulated, even though we've had a long history and a long tradition of revering the teacher. That's a different kind of thing. But to look at the teacher as an agency that can bring about change, and this was formally put in the 1986 New Education Policy at that time, with a dedicated chapter on teacher training, saying that we regard teachers as agents of social change. And that was sort of music to the ears. But if we looked at the subtext of the policy, in the 1986 policy itself, we saw that the subtext was actually moving towards reforms that aligned to the neoliberal economic policy, right? So, which of course formally came in the early 1990s. So in that sense, there was a shift that took place despite this sort of centrality of the teacher that was talked about in the mid 1980s. But when the economic policy came in of liberalization, we saw that there was a shift in education and its purposes from nation building and emancipation as goals to largely employment orientation and competition, which was at the global level, and slowly that got into a more sort of internationalized discourse. Now, if we look at the trajectory that this took, what happened to the teacher in this trajectory? Because in this trajectory, the cultures of performativity sort of took over, and teachers became the objects of reform, because the idea was to look at the teacher and to change the teacher, to change the individual teacher in order to bring about educational change, and therefore the impact of education in terms of nation building, in terms of national growth, in terms of economic growth, because that became the focus. So curricula started becoming more prescriptive, something that needed to be tweaked to fit in a certain state agenda. And the idea of teacher education, teacher agency got replaced by prescriptive ideas of curriculum and pedagogy. But it was interesting that in the mid 2000, because of change in political regime, because that always creates a change in the trajectories of education, we found the NCF coming in 2005, which tried to reposition both the curricular discourse as situated in the diversity of the country, in the constitutional aims of equity and social justice, and looking at the teacher also as an important partner in this process. And teachers were seen in the curricular discourse as agents of social change once again. So now this kind of a repositioning was not happening in policy, but it was happening through the curricular discourse. Of course, we can say curricular policy, but then education policy itself continued with the neoliberal measures that it had taken that path. So we found that testing regimes became more and more important, and therefore the wedge between a curricular discourse that was more sort of aligned to the constitutional agenda, that became very far away from the policy measures that were being taken, which focused more and more on testing regimes. And we find here that the old idea of the state, where teacher was viewed as a state implementing agency, that idea kept on. It sort of kept going forward. It's not as if the teacher was suddenly seen differently. And I will say why, despite the NCF 2005, because unfortunately, NCF 2005 laid a lot of emphasis on curriculum and on textbooks, on bringing in local knowledges, on bringing in different diverse sources of knowledges, which I think was amazing. And also the fact that curriculum itself was redefined, not as something static inside textbook covers, but something that happens within the quotidian of a classroom, where you actually construct meaning in a togetherness of the discourse between teachers, children, amongst children, and so on. So those were wonderfully powerful ideas. But unfortunately, NCF undermined itself by giving little importance to the teacher in this process. Because if you regard curriculum as something that's constructed within the classroom, then there's no doubt that beyond the textbook, it is the teacher who plays a very critical role in the way she or he may interpret the text and enable students to interpret the text and bring those knowledges to converge to some meaningful understanding. So in a sense, the NCF undermined itself, I would say, by doing this. And probably this is the reason why NCF, to some extent, was unable to disrupt the anti-teacher discourse that had already been created through the policy trajectory following neoliberal agendas. And I think that led us to a space of some kind of a status quo in terms of teachers. And the question therefore arises at that time itself, when the NCF came in, when NCFTE came in, that dovetailed very well with the ideas of NCF 2005. That is for the first time when teacher education curricula and school education curricula actually converged in terms of their objectives and the pedagogic imagination they were trying to bring forth. But the question that came at that time was, can teacher agency disrupt the status quo that we had achieved in terms of the teacher because of the neoliberal agenda? So that question sort of lurked for a long, long time. And then we saw that within the altered purposes of education, one major thing that happened, which actually robbed the teachers of their very soul, their work, was the complete irrelevance of teacher professional judgment. You know, something that Biesta calls as the heart and soul of teaching. Because when a teacher is teaching, she is all the time assess how much she's been able to communicate, how well she's communicating, how her learners are actually responding to the issues that are being discussed and engaged with. So there's a continuous consciousness on the part of the teacher to make these professional judgments. And of course, I must here very clearly point out that when I use the word judgment, I am making a very, very critical distinction between judging, assessing, gauging, and being judgmental. So we can't confuse the two. And professional judgment is probably one of the most critical capacities of a teacher who's able to engage with her students at whatever level. Now, given these altered sort of purposes of education, which means moving more towards education for employment and for economic growth and nation's economic growth and so on, and not looking at education's role in terms of the society we want, in terms of the kind of social issues that we'd like to address through education, that also led to sidelining the critical role of the teacher as one whose professional judgment is important. So when the teacher's professional judgment was marginalized or seen as irrelevant, seen as not necessary, schools themselves lost even that slightest possibility of remaining sites of contestation, sites of questioning, sites of dialogue, sites where we can question even textbook knowledge, which is exactly what the NCF also tries to say, that we need to engage with multiple perspectives of maybe the same historical event and try and verify and understand the knowledge claims within the textbook or what the teacher brings in or what the students bring in, and that kind of. So schools sort of also lost that space that was somewhat there, which individual teachers would take advantage of, but unfortunately, systemically, it was not quite there. Teacher voices were silenced slowly as a result of the hegemonic discourse of reforms. And therefore, the question became another complex question, the question with which we began during the NCF, can teacher agency disrupt status quo? The question then became, can teachers disrupt status quo and restore the place that they ought to have in the system of education? Because teachers were getting marginalized. So we had to now sort of ask this question, can we look at agency? And in agency, I'm looking at self, I'm looking at identities, and I'm coming to that in a more detailed, nuanced way in a little while. So this became a very critical question. And therefore, the point for us was can we restore the teacher's professional self-governing practice? And here I mean the teacher herself is in control of several things, not only the curriculum, which she should own, but also the pedagogic approach that she would take, and looking at teaching as a self-governing practice looks like a dream for us now, because we've come very far away from it. There was a time when teachers had that space. And I would say that today, whether we are school teachers or whether we are higher education teachers, we are all in the same basket. We are all people who have lost our spaces, our very rightful spaces of taking decisions in where we work, for example. So the question, therefore, was now for us, how do we restore the teacher's professional self-governing space that the teacher has lost? And for this question to be even looked at seriously, it was important that we looked at the concept of teacher agency. And here I'd like to be a little theoretical to get into understanding this concept before we sort of arrive at our own sort of, conceptualizations, because this concept itself has been very controversial. It has been specifically in the structure and individual agency realm. So I'd like to say that in order to engage with the idea of agency, which subsumes the idea of self and identity, it's important to look at teachers' position in society and teachers' position in education itself. So therefore, the current context becomes even more important for us today, as we see that not only alternate purposes of education have reached a certain logical conclusion, but we find that the altered structures and the cultures that they bring with it are now being given concrete institutional shapes and institutional legitimacy. And we see that happening in front of our eyes within spaces of education and within the policy space, whether it is in the NEP 2020 document or is inside the Secretary of Education's office, where today there are corporate people as consultants sitting over there and giving you advice if you go to the government to ask for how and what we can do in the space of education. So I'm just trying to point out a few things in terms of where we are currently. So this is the context in which we're looking at questions of identity, questions of self within teacher agency. So theoretically speaking, the capitalist idea of agency is that of free will. Now, this was completely rejected by the socialist feminists because they looked at agency as akinly related to power and ideology, and it was not really a matter of free will. Butler went on to say that resistance to authority is what agency is about. So it's not just simply about power relationships and ideology, but it entails resistance, and resistance to challenging the normalizing effects of institutional practices. So which means that we are also talking about agency, not in terms of a future, but in terms of looking at where we are today and analyzing and understanding that is also part of agency, which means we have to problematize the current spaces that we are in. And only then we will be able to develop a sense of agency, and what kind of agencies I'll come in a little while. But to take this logic further, once again, we come back to Biesta's thought that because teachers' professional judgment became irrelevant, the reason why it became irrelevant is because the heart and soul of education is now being seen for a while and crystallized in the NEP 2020 as learning outcomes and evidence-based education. Now, this is the reason why the teacher's professional judgment doesn't matter, because the learning outcomes are given to you and there are lesson plans which you can buy off the market and you can teach. So where is the teacher's professional judgment? It becomes more and more marginalized until, I would say, with the digitalization that we are now confronted with right now, in fact, and as we expect even primary school children to sit in front of their screens. And this has been again pushed not only by the state outside policy, but now legitimized through policy. It's actually leading to the disappearance of the teacher from within the classroom. It's leading to a space where not only the teacher loses her agency, but actually the child is losing her or his agency, because I can mute any child at any time I want. And it is entirely at my will that I will unmute anybody who's trying to ask a question. So in that sense, we are surrendering all of this. So coming back to the question of agency, I would say it's also rooted in Deweyan concepts of action, where he talks of reflection in action, for example, where Dewey very beautifully expresses how the purposes of education are entwined with the processes of education. And that's why he even calls education a social process itself. So let's look at what are these agencies that we are talking about. I can flag something called intellectual agency, which is the teacher having the control in her hands to decide curriculum, to decide which chapter to teach when, to bring in which knowledges, to bring in what resources, or rather their epistemic identities. The agency which helps the teacher to become reflexive within the classroom, carry a reflexive disposition, and develop critical professional repertoires. A teacher who would have not only an individual sense of agency when she's inside the classroom, engaging with children, engaging with adults, and enabling more sort of communicative pedagogic approaches, enabling meaning making, but where the teacher becomes part of a collective to exercise agency. So agency is not just about individuals or individual teachers, but it's about a collective. Because after all, we need to look at teachers as both epistemic and social beings. And I would also go to the extent of saying that there is enough theoretical engagement with the subject to tell us that identities and subjectivities which make up the agency of an individual are negotiated and constituted within the social. So this is not just about one psychological process or as if agency is something residing inside the individual, but it is something that gets constituted within the social, which means there's an interface between the individual and the social, which becomes important. Now, the question is, can we cultivate this idea of agency, both individual and collective, in teachers? And I think this becomes important as a discourse today because we have been thrown on the margins, or rather thrown off the road as teachers. And therefore, I'm trying to bring back this discourse in today's session. So the focus needs to be on subjectivity, and subjectivity that creates the opportunity to reconfigure personal identities, social identities. So we are not just talking about the teacher acting in a certain way, which is agentic, but the teacher engages with her own self as a person, where she's given the opportunity to create and to reconfigure her own personal identities. And we need to see if that's possible to do through pre-service programs, through in-service programs, where we bring teachers closer to their aspirations, to their identities. For example, do we ever ask the teacher what her education vision is? Or do we have to just tell her that these are the great thinkers who tell us what education should be about? I mean, I think engaging with the teacher on her vision of education would be one element of engaging with her subjectivities, her identities, and enabling some kind of a way in which she aspires towards a certain kind of agentic being, and helping her to sort of unshackle herself from the socialization that impedes her own agency. And I'd like to actually over here just read out a small piece of narrative. Do I have time? I can't hear you.
Sure, ma'am, sure. Please go ahead.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, because you've over sort of run the previous session. So I'm going to read, these are a set of narratives that I had collated from some of the graduates of the BLEd program across different colleges. And I will read out a small section of one such narrative, which helps you to see how, how this teacher actually looks at herself after going through this 4-year program. So she says, I was brought up to become a civilized, cultured girl and a good daughter. So I was a good child. And I came face to face with myself through a series of self-development workshops and through theoretical engagement on issues of identity, caste, gender, and social exclusion. I started to understand how my socialization was actually influencing the kind of decisions I was taking in my everyday life. And that is when there was the start of a dialogue with myself. I'm paraphrasing this, I'm not reading it verbatim. So she says she started to discover herself and started to actually respect herself, with the result that there were bursts of creativity, and she was writing poetry, she was taking part in the arts and even acting. But she was very aware of her identity as a Dalit. And that was always sort of, interfering with what she was doing and how she was doing, because she was always feeling guilty that she's a Dalit, as many people around her used to tell her that you've got admission on the basis of reservation. But then the guilt worked on her so much that she actually started rejecting the idea of reservation even as a policy. But through the different courses and practicum opportunities, for example, she talks of gender in schooling, how her own assumptions and beliefs about gender became evident to her. And she started questioning herself. And that is when she became very confused as well, because she was being watched and looked at as a person who was always questioning, who was always fighting at home, who was asserting her identity as a woman. She said, my family started looking at me as a quarrelsome misfit. I had lost my feminine charm of being compliant, of being submissive. And I thought to myself, what is happening to me? And my friends also, outside college, told me that textbook knowledge is not about real life. So I became absolutely confused. It took me a long time to get out of that feeling. And then I became a little more resilient when I started looking at how the constant questioning, which created suffering for me, had opened new ways of understanding the world and myself. And she felt that it transformed her both intellectually as well as emotionally. And there came a time when she could see how certain sociological concepts that she came in interaction with through her courses, how those helped her understand how the educational discourse is dominated by the upper caste, urban, male thinking. And that is when she slowly understood that teachers are influenced by the political and the social forces that shape them. And they just simply become conduits of textbook information. And she shares very beautifully that in her class, hardly anybody had come to the BLEd program out of first choice. They did not want to become teachers. And yet, soon, during the self-development workshops, and as the years went by, they started appreciating each other, which they did very little earlier. They used to belittle each other. There was a one-upmanship, And when a whole lot of childhood experiences were shared in these development workshops, it developed insight into the prejudices, the biases that people had, that we had with each other, about each other. And that is when she came to terms with the fear of failure and isolation. And she regained her confidence. She says that I actually felt that I had released myself of a very big burden, that she was able to dialogue with herself, and that she was really in a position to look at herself as a person who had transformed in some very major way. She does attribute a lot of this to the kind of exposure that she had, not just in the theoretical courses, the practicum, but even the corporate life of the college. So she looks at that as giving her the opportunity to look at the diverse ways in which people look at the world. And that if she looks at something in a certain way, then that's not the only way. And that there are ways to sort of go beyond that. So I'd just like to say that this narrative brought three major aspects right in front of my eyes as I was trying to analyze and I was trying to make sense of what subjectivities are about and the self and identities are about in developing a teacher. And I came to this understanding that actually the first important thing that seems to have happened in this case, and maybe in many other cases, and it's not true that this would have been the case with everybody. So I'm giving you only a peep into one such narrative. So the first thing was that there was an opportunity for her and for many such people, I guess, to disrupt the normative discourse and to challenge socialization. Because what she was able to see is that the normative discourse is very intimately tied to the subjective experiences of caste or gender or class or language or community or even religion. And this reminds me of what Krishna Kumar writes in his one of his books, where he says that we need to perceive the school in conflict with the community's code of socialization. So in a sense, what he's trying to say is that the school should be like a counter socialization. And I could see in this narrative that the BLEd provided a kind of a counter socialization for some of the students, at least in this narrative it comes out. And also they were able to see how diversities come into being and how stereotypes and discriminatory attitudes actually buttress inequality, and they construct it in different ways. They also seem to have learned that school knowledges themselves need to be deconstructed and perhaps reconstructed, that we need to verify knowledge claims, that we need to question and examine the veracity of knowledges that are in our textbooks or in the readings that we do. So they were able to see that knowledge itself is not neutral, that it can be interpreted in different ways, and there are selective ways in which knowledge is communicated or disseminated. And I think, to borrow a very beautiful word from Dewey's, one of his works, where he uses the word habitude, I think what was happening is that school curriculum, assumptions, cultural beliefs about knowledge, all of this was actually providing the opportunity to unsettle habitudes. And why I use the word habitudes is that I think it explains very beautifully that attitude and habit probably go together, and that attitudes are not just about emotions and affect, but it's about our intellectual way of looking at things, our mental beliefs, our way of viewing the world. And I think what was happening in this aspect of disrupting the normative discourse and challenging socialization was also a deconstruction of the perceptions about oneself and understanding her own identity as something that was tied up to the diversity of the country. And that was not only tied up to the diversity, but it was tied up to questions of social justice. What was happening through this narrative, I found, was that there was a challenging of the cultural self. And that was a very interesting insight for me, because I seem to then come to the understanding that this narrative seems to tell us that not only was she able to break away from the shackles of socialization, and I don't think there's a complete breaking away that I'm talking about, but you sort of unshackle yourself layer by layer, but you wrestle your way through the structures and through what structures actually impede agency. And agency in this sense was for me a socially constituted self. A self that was not coming out only from within herself, but something that came out from her whole social experience, from the society that had shackled her in the first place. The second most important insight I gained from here was that there needs to be in the curriculum and in the pedagogic imagination of preparing teachers, the capacity to develop the capacity to imagine and to find voice. And what I mean by this is that, something that Shiva Priya, one of our MEd scholars, who did a very interesting dissertation on looking at the role of creative drama in the BLEd program. And she had done a very interesting documentation talking to those who were actually taking those drama classes and also trying to find out from the students themselves. What she do understanding was that what drama did was to create possibilities when none existed. What drama did was to provide a platform to imagine. What drama did was to enable epistemic shifts in the notion of pedagogy. And the most important thing she says is that it created the possibility of democratizing the classroom space itself. Because the drama space was a space that was outside the four walls of the classroom, that was associated with authority. It created a non-threatening environment to engage with my own biases about caste, my own biases about gender, about religion, about language, whatever it may be. And this decontextualized psychological frame formed, which usually forms the dominant subculture of teacher preparation, was substituted with a deliberative discourse. And the discourse that spoke of citizenship, not just an entitlement of my rights, but the need to also fight and struggle for others' rights. When you look at diversity, when you look at questions of inclusion, and you look at teaching itself as a socio-political practice. And what lastly in this section, where she's talking, where I think we are saying that the teacher program itself gave the opportunity to develop the capacity to imagine and find voice. What was important in the narrative for me is that this particular graduate actually shared the fact that she found her voice, which was assertive within the personal space of her family and her community. And I think that is probably the most significant point, or an inflection point, I would call it, which will help her to sort of look at herself and her own development as breaking away from those shackles, if she could do it within her personal space. The last most important opportunity, I think, that this narrative tells me that the teacher ed program provided was the opportunity to experience the language of possibility and the language of social justice. So we are not just critiquing, we are not just looking at discrimination, we are not just looking at diversity in terms of discrimination or romanticizing it as something which is celebratory, but we are looking at the possibility of interfacing the social with the individual, where we can call into question hierarchies and inequalities are being voiced, are being, expressed as concerns, and dissent is accepted. Dissent is expressed and dissent is accepted. And with the breakdown of power equations between the teacher and the taught, which happened in many of the BLEd classes, but certainly in drama or in self-development or in observing children, some of the practicum sort of courses, the power equations between the teacher and the taught sort of broke down. And that created the language of possibility and the possibility of looking at social justice issues. So for example, if in contemporary India, we were talking about poverty, we did just look at poverty as the popular notion as an economic indicator. But poverty was looked at something that was not just related to income, like Amartya Sen says. It is something that actually stifles the very capabilities that are not allowed to develop. And therefore, poverty is also not looked at as an individual condition. So I'm just giving one conceptual example to say that these are possibilities. But that doesn't mean that every single contemporary India class in every single college is able to do this. I'm only saying the possibilities are immense. And then, of course, within this language of possibility, there was also the possibility of beginning the individual in the larger socio-political frame, and to look at the collective and the role of the collective in creating change. And in this sense, it was possible, as Biesta says, that the process of continual imaginative reconstruction of the future became the order of the day. So that you're looking at possible future constraints, but you're also looking at possibilities of how to overcome those constraints. And these become practically possible. And then you develop yourself as epistemic and social beings. So coming back to the socialist feminist assertion that agency is located in the collective as much as in the individual, that teachers require deep engagement with structural reforms and the disruption of teaching as self-normalizing practice. And in conclusion, engaging teachers with complex dynamics between the self, the other, between episteme and power is really at the heart of the proposed shift that I'm trying to show in the narrative of teacher education itself. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Batra. That this was a very rich session in terms of the theory of self and identity and its linkages with the experience and narrative of a teacher who's in the process of preparation, the difficulties that they go through, the challenges of overcoming them, and the most interesting part is the teacher education program itself becoming a little cosmos where of change and possibilities. There are disruptions, and also, I thought it was very interesting, like the place where when disciplines become rigid, there are other forms like theater, which is kind of opening up the rigidities and giving possibilities for greater exploration of and breaking down the barriers of hierarchy and power, and giving also opportunities for expanding the notion of what is actually possible, and also how to explore justice itself through that particular program. I thought that this is very interesting, very also because many of us are engaged in the program to look at it in terms of how a student has developed over a period of time. And their own reflections. Very interesting. If this is a written paper, if we could post it on the chat box, this would be. I think it would help a lot of people because I think this discussion requires a little more slow deliberation to also gather in terms of what we can possibly do with teacher education programs. There are a few questions
just to respond to this. This is not yet a published paper, but I'm glad to have shared it with you. I guess when it is in that that shape, then I'd be able to share it with everybody. But yes, this was my purpose. Since you're all within teacher education programs, I thought it would be interesting peep into this. But I do hope that I did not communicate in any way that this is a utopia or that this is happening everywhere. No, it isn't. But these are possibilities. And these are important for us to engage with because we are in the business of education and teacher education.
Very interesting how the process of critique itself becomes also starts showing new ways of developing, new ways in possibilities and routes opening up. This is a very enriching session indeed. There are a few questions that have come from the participants. One of them is to do with, I think it is also to do with the narrative that has been presented. Neha Sharma asks, how do you see this, understanding the person by scrutinizing personal experiences in a depersonalized manner? Is it a sort of temporary depersonalization?
Okay, the narrative itself. So the question is that the narrative is depersonalized. It's an articulation in a depersonalized manner. Is that what the question is?
Neha, maybe you can unmute yourself and then.
Yes. Yes, Neha.
Good evening, ma'am. I take the human relations and communication paper. So this is my personal observation that to take them towards self-awareness, I have to take them a little afar. I mean, to look at self from a depersonalized perspective. So it's a constant question with which I struggle in the class, whether to let them speak in their own person, or just to take, them a little far from their internal state and, look it from a neutral perspective, from a third person's eye. So talking about self in my own person or looking at self like an object of inquiry. So probably that's, yeah.
Yes. Actually, there are various ways of looking at this. I think certainly, looking at the subject as, the self as a subject of inquiry can certainly be one way. And if you look at it from within, let's say what is called as witness consciousness, that you don't look at yourself as a subject, but you look at yourself as a doer. And in that, what Dewey calls reflection in action, that you're watching yourself, okay? Now, I would say that there are different ways in which we do look at this. But yes, at one level, it's a good idea to sort of, look at yourself as a subject that can be interrogated. But more than that, I think the self and other sort of interface, the self and social interface gives you a far wider lens through which you look at yourself, rather than looking at the self through the self alone. Although that's important, I think. But I would encourage that we sort of widen that horizon, because a lot of the time our self is also determined by how others view us. And therefore that sort of connection, and here the other is not homogeneous, right? It's in so many diverse ways. So perhaps one can have longer discussion around this, but it's a very interesting question.
Thank you.
Yeah, Radhika, if you allow me, can I ask?
Yeah, there is one question,
Sure, please.
Sanjay, before, maybe we can have that. There is a question by Preeti on how are learning outcomes different from professional judgment of the teacher.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Well, learning outcomes as it's being defined has been defined, and now not just by the RTE, but by various corporate sector organizations. Learning outcomes are like static, outcomes of whatever has happened in the classroom. Learning outcomes don't even look at what has happened in the classroom. They are a set of learning objectives, you can say, set of learning things it's performance oriented, right? So it's about static knowledge. It's about what you can regurgitate, what you can reproduce. Whereas professional judgment of the teacher is something that happens inside the act of teaching. You know, that when I am teaching, whether I'm teaching class 1 or whether I'm teaching a B.Ed or a B.L.Ed or a MA history class, as I'm engaging on a particular issue, topic, concern, subject, whatever it is, I am trying to assess for myself, have I communicated what I really intend to? Are my students with me? Are they in tune with me? The question that the student asks, I make a judgment about that, not about the student, but about the question. Is this question asking, is this question really about this? And I may even pose another question to clarify. So what I am doing in my act of pedagogic communication is when I am making professional judgments all the time. And I might be wrong also. It's not as if professional judgment will always be correct. I could be wrong. I mean, it happens to many of us. We teach, we come out of the class, oh, wow, this class went off really well. And you just might find the students say, no, it didn't go very well, or the other way around. So, but professional judgment is about my work, my practice, my pedagogic communication, my curricular engagement, and what I'm able to disseminate, what I'm able to engage with, what I'm able to unpackage, all of that, I think. And it's about learning experiences. So that's the critical difference between learning outcomes and learning experiences. And professional judgment is all about learning experiences.
Yeah, maybe Sanjay, you had a question?
Yeah. Thank you, मैम. कई सारे इश्यूज पे आपने बहुत अच्छे से बात की मैम. एक सवाल जो था वो ये लगातार एनईपी को पढ़ने के बाद आता है कि जब हम टीचर के प्रोबेशन पीरियड्स को बढ़ा रहे हैं, जब हम उसे टेन्योर ट्रैक के ऊपर लेकर जा रहे हैं और जब हम टीचर्स को हायर कर रहे हैं, तो इन हालातों में जिस टीचर की हम बात कर रहे हैं उसका सेल्फ और उसकी आइडेंटिटी किस तरह से इनसिक्योरिटी के साथ अगर वो बढ़ रही है तो वो क्या फ्रेम बनेगा उसकी सेल्फ और उसकी आइडेंटिटी को लेकर. जी मैम.
बिल्कुल सही. इसीलिए मैंने शुरू में ये बात कही थी और बहुत जरूरी बात है कि अगर हम एजुकेशन को भी एक एम्पावरमेंट का प्रोसेस मानते हैं कि हम एजुकेशन के थ्रू छोटे बच्चे, बड़े बच्चे, एडल्ट्स, लर्नर्स को एम्पावर करना, तो सबसे पहले तो मुझे अपनी ही एम्पावरमेंट को देखना होगा. और मेरी एम्पावरमेंट तो तब आएगी जब मैं अपने आप से, I'm at peace with myself. There's a security. There is a sense of security. And that sense of security cannot just be psychological security. It is economic security as well. It is social security. I mean, if I belong to the lowest rung of the caste system, then that creates all kinds of insecurities in me, which will interfere in my work. And if I'm not, getting a regular income, or I'm treated the way I am in today's world, how the teacher's worth is and what the teacher's treated as, then obviously these goals become very lofty. But my submission is that instead of looking at these educational goals and processes as lofty, we have to put our gaze on the systemic problems that we need to address, confront, and not take it as a given. Although I understand that it's not so simple to, we can see the system weighing on us every day and what it's doing to us. It's silencing us. Some of us are unable to even open our mouths because we are so fearful. So I'm completely in tune with what you're asking. There are no solutions at the individual level for this. But yes, when I'm inside my classroom, that space can provide me with something. And that's why I also spoke of collective agency. I don't think it's enough to talk of individual agency of teachers. And I would also go so far as saying political agency, epistemic agency. I think we need to expand this idea of agency and do a little more theorization around it to understand how we can evolve this into a more workable construct within the teacher preparation frame.
Here there is a question that has been raised by Anshika. I mean, it's more like a comment which kind of fits in with what you have responded now. She says there's just a reflection on digital classrooms. Along with silencing or selective silencing, it facilitates the classrooms are now losing the possible scope they otherwise could have as spaces for counter socialization.
Yeah, that's very true. In fact, there are no classrooms. There are only screens in which we see people, or we don't see people, or we mute people and we shut them up. So it's true. That is why this is so dangerous. Because I think the digitalization that's being pushed and now legitimized through policy is really a process through which we are surrendering all our rights as teachers, our rights as learners, our rights as citizens. And I think this needs very, very careful, strategic thinking on how to counter it, how to stop this very steep sort of slide that we are, or pit that we are falling in. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more.
I think there's a lot of there are a lot many questions that I'm sure people are mulling over, because it does raise questions also, because you've also historically located the movement towards the situation. I mean, right, for instance, the difficult structural constraints that are operating upon us today, you've historically traced it from our policies in the past and to where we have currently reached. And now, but I think I also see a sense of hope, in the sense that there could be spaces, and it is for us to explore how we utilize these spaces for working out the trajectories, and not only for us as teachers ourselves, but also for those who are preparing to be teachers, and through them also possibly for the children whom we work with. So even though things are difficult, maybe there is certainly some hope in terms of what is possible. Thank you very much. I'm sure when your paper comes out, we would all be eagerly looking forward to reading it. And we'll close this session. I think there's one more question. Let me see. Yeah, it's just a comment about how it has been a thought-provoking lecture. There is one question. What worries me the most is that in the semester system, the quality of teaching and learning has deteriorated. So it's again one observation that has come in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the reason why we fought against semesterizing the B.Ed and the B.Ed. I mean, so far we've succeeded, but I don't know. So yes, you're absolutely correct. I mean, semesterization has actually completely diminished the space that faculty and students have with each other. And it's sort of overpowered by the whole thing called testing sort of regimes, because that's all we're doing, mid-semester break and some house examination and then end semester and mid-semester exams. So yes, yeah. So, it's a structural attack, actually, and we need to understand that. But today I focused on the softer areas, but to show that these softer areas need attention. To create a discourse of resistance, to create a discourse which is counter. I think it's important. We just cannot simply say these are softer areas and structures are what matters. Well, yes, I mean, I would say, I don't know. I just thought I must share with you a beautiful documentary that I saw just yesterday on Netflix. It's called My Octopus Teacher. Please see it. It's available on Netflix. It teaches us a lot.
Some work for that. So everybody has something to watch today evening.
Oh, okay. You can do it tomorrow, day after, whenever.
Okay. Thank you very much for that session. Over to you, Dr. Ravneet, if you want to make some closing remarks.
And I think I was saying when I requested Dr. Radhika to facilitate this session, and I did not get it myself. It because today I would have not been able to gather the right words to thank Professor Batra, because I am feeling so overwhelmed by the session, and every word that ma'am you shared with us made so much meaning, not just to the academic discourse, but also personally to all of us, I feel. Because as teachers, we are always struggling with our own sense of self and identity. So it's a very, very important lecture for all of us, I'm sure. And what very, very modestly you said that these are the soft areas are actually the questions of self and identity are actually the most pivotal issues, uh, which I think will remain eternal, because political and educational scenario will keep changing, but teacher being the center of change will never ever change, I feel. So I'm very, very thankful to you for touching upon this area and giving us an opportunity to think. And indeed, I do feel, not because I'm a BLEd faculty, but I do feel that BLEd program is ahead of times, and it gives us a reason to understand teachers in totality, not just help become teachers, but also to understand teachers in totality. So thank you once again. And this has been a wonderful opportunity to listen from you, ma'am. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Is there any announcement for tomorrow?
Thank you.
There is
From
only
the tech-
one announcement that tomorrow we are going to have a photograph. So that is the most important announcement from my side.
The technical team, is there any announcement?
Divya ma'am?
Dr. Sanjay Sharma, is there any announcement for tomorrow?
एक कल फोटोग्राफ सेशन होगा इवनिंग में। आप सबको अपना वीडियो ऑन करना है, उस समय हम अनाउंस करेंगे। ये जरूरी है हमारे रिकॉर्ड के लिए। और दूसरा, क्विज और फीडबैक का हमने टाइम बढ़ाया है, आप टेलीग्राम ग्रुप में देख लीजिए, उसमें टाइम स्पेसिफिकली बताया गया है कितने समय के लिए हमने बढ़ाया है, तो आप उसको कंप्लीट कर दीजिए। जिसने पुराने फीडबैक्स अपने नहीं भरे हैं और क्विजेज नहीं कंप्लीट किए, और कल मास्टर क्विज है, सभी को अनिवार्य रूप से उसमें शामिल होना है, उसको अटेम्प्ट करना है और उसमें पास भी होना है। बिना पास हुए काम नहीं चलेगा, और अच्छा स्कोर भी करना है, क्योंकि हम मेंशन करते हैं ग्रेड A+, हम नहीं चाहते हैं कि किसी को C+ और B ओनली मिले, हम चाहते हैं सबको A+ और A तो मिले ही। तो ये आप सब ध्यान रखिएगा। और कल का दिन महत्वपूर्ण है, फोटोग्राफ के हिसाब से भी और क्विज के हिसाब से भी, मास्टर क्विज दोनों चीजें आएंगी। और अकादमिक यात्रा का ये आज लगभग चौथा दिन है, और एक बहुत सुंदर पड़ाव प्रोफेसर पूनम बत्रा का रहा आज इस सेशन में। उन सबका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, और धन्यवाद रवनीत का कि संजय जी का कि एक बहुत सुंदर सा प्रोग्राम डिजाइन किया आप दोनों ने। ठीक है, आज का दिन यूट्यूब बंद कर दें संजय, रिकॉर्डिंग